All right. And what would a stream discussion be without my Irish coffee?
Yes. Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. It's welcome. This is Comic Boom. I am here with Dark Knight. I got my instead of my usual crown, I got some spiced rum and Coke.
Changing it up, I see.
DarkKnightNation. This is my DarkKnightNation is my compatriot in arms, and we are here to talk about Marvel Comics under C.B. Cebulski. Say hi. Say hi, Dark Knight.
Hi, what's going on, guys? Thank you for joining us, and I'm looking forward to getting into this conversation. So, Thank you for having me, brother. Let's get to chatting.
Yeah, well, first, I just want to start off by telling everyone that feel free to leave some comments in the chat. I am going to be checking the chat every now and then, and I will post any comments that you have. I know that we don't have a lot of people really in the chat, but if we do, feel free to ask a question. We might bring it up and talk about it. What this discussion is, Dark Knight and I had a discussion last week about the firing of Dan Didio and the impact that would have on DC Comics and sort of the a lot of the controversy surrounding the letting go of Didio, his firing. And I thought I wanted to do a video on Marvel Comics, particularly under C.B. Cebluski, because a lot of people forget that, and they forget very quickly, we comic book readers, we can immediately forgive a comic book company if they can quickly recover, and we're quick to forgive, but we're also very quick to judge. We're very quick to judge as a comic book community, I find. And I'm like that too, and I don't apologize for it. I was born a little bum and I just grew into an asshole. That's just who I am. But that's just the way it is. And the reality is that people forget that in 2017, Marvel had a terrible year. So terrible, in fact, that I'm going to put up. I did a summary of how bad it was. 10 months out of the 12 months of 2017, Marvel, under then Editor-in-Chief Axel Alonso, was in fact a disaster. They had a PR disaster almost every month, and I'm going to put it up here. And this is a summary. And you'll note that the question that is posed in our discussion that Dark Knight and I are going to have is, has Marvel Comics gotten better under C.B. Cebluski? We're just going to call him C.B. And at the end, we always want to keep in mind, because I'm a lover of DC, I want to know if DC Comics can learn anything maybe under Marvel's experience in the last 2 years. Now, I just want to review. I want to quickly state in 2017, in January of 2017, Marvel had a PR disaster. In January, they had a digital download controversy where they instead of allowing you to download the comic book you were reading, there were other comic books that you could download, but that annoyed fans. In March, there was this was probably one of the biggest things of the year. Where there was an ICV2 report where Axel Alonso stated that artists do not move the needle. He actually said that. He said artists don't really move the needle. They don't sell a lot of comic books. Astonishingly stupid thing to say. And boy, has he been proven wrong as of late with all the variant covers and all the big name artists that are making money doing a lot of covers. Also, David Gabriel, VP of sales at this time, stated that those immortal words, diversity does not sell, which just created a huge backlash. The comic book culture war, which was already underway, continued to skyrocket even more with the SJWs versus Comicsgate and all that jazz. And people from all different stripes and sizes took sides, and YouTube just exploded with controversy, and a lot of people gained a lot of subscribers as a result. In April, the X-Men Gold controversy with Artie and CF was fired off X-Men Gold because he incorporated some of his religious beliefs, some arguably anti-Semitic viewpoints in X-Men Gold. In May of 2017, the Secret Empire debacle began. I call it a debacle. I guess it was a controversy. Marvel did a very poor job sort of handling that Secret Empire, arguably. Of course, Captain America becoming a Hydra Cap, becoming a Nazi. That was not good, particularly given the fallout of 2016 with Trump winning the election and the cultural and political atmosphere of the United States in particular, and even the rest of the whole world. It sort of combined to make it a very rough year for Marvel. We then, in June of that year, they had the legacy gimmick renumbering controversy and their covers, their legacy covers, that they got a lot of backlash from fans. They screwed up on the numbering of the legacy numbering. In August of 2017, there was a mini revolt by retailers stating that they would not carry Legacy because they were that upset with it. All flowing from this idea that they didn't like the. It's not that they didn't like the diverse characters like Riri Williams or Miss Marvel. It's just that they never sold as many comic books. And there was some truth to what David Gabriel said, but it upset a lot of people who decided to call him racist instead of a realist. But I digress. September of that year, the New York Times spoils the ending of Secret Empire. October of that year, that the New York Comic Con, retailer complaining got a lot of weight. Retailers complained about the overemphasis on diverse characters as opposed to focusing on the leadership of the classic characters of the original Thor Odinson, Tony Stark, Iron Man, and of course non-Hydra Cap. And in November, of course, was probably the most significant. Bendis leaves Marvel in November of 2017. I forgot it was that long ago. But Bendis leaves Marvel in November of 2017. Axel Alonso steps down, although I think it was more fair to say he was likely pushed out, likely fired. Cebluski is hired as editor-in-chief in November of 2017, and I'm sure there's a lot of DC fans, I among them, that consider that Bendis leaving Marvel in November of 2017 to be a DC blunder or a Dan Didio blunder as opposed to a Marvel blunder. But in any event, that's what happened in 2017. Now, flash forward, since that period of time, it's been over 2 years. You look at the state of DC Comics right now, Dark Knight, and you look at the state of Marvel. Marvel has increased their market share. They've increased their sales. They've increased their productivity. They've increased their publications. They seem to have a better relationship with their writers. They seem to have a better relationship with retailers. They seem to have a better relationship with speculators. Give me your initial thoughts.
Well, I think Marvel has really been on the up since their Fresh Start initiative. And I give a lot of credit to Cebulski because you could see an almost immediate change after he took the reins. And for me, I was a kind of a tangential Marvel fan, around that time, 2017. I had only really read a couple of the things that, the friendly Marvel fan would recommend based on, a number of things, whether it be the imprint that it left on the universe or maybe just the quality of the story. And, when we got Fresh Start, I think wasn't it you, me, and Bill? Didn't we did like a thing talking about like Marvel Fresh Start, like around the time I was still new to YouTube, and talking about how positive it was. It was a line-wide thing. It made me, somebody who I think I had only been picking up on a monthly basis, maybe 2 or 3 Marvel titles, to buying like 10, 15 Marvel titles a month. And I've kept most of them. I've been picking those up on a recurring basis for a while. But I think the thing that Marvel has kind of begun to understand is how to properly interact with their creators. I hear nothing but good things about, how these writers and artists are feeling about how CB is handling the editorial office and the Marvel creative bullpen. And you bring up something there that was up on the screen on the banner for a second about better writers. I mean, based on our conversation last week, I do think that DC and Marvel have almost equivalent talent in terms of their writers and artists. But the big focus is Marvel has a better consensus on what they're doing editorially. And that is what's going to drive the line as a whole to quality. Obviously, C.B. Cebulski is doing things that Alonso straight up wouldn't. Hickman has been trying to do this with the X-Men for years. Hickman has had this pitch in the bag for years. And I think Cebulski, as a whole, has a better grasp on what the fans want, because we're really starting to get into this generation of people in power in comics that are fans of comics. They didn't just happen upon these jobs by virtue of the fact that they have an English degree and they want a job. They are actual fans who are striving for these positions. And whether or not you always agree with the choices they make, you can tell that it's out of passion. And I think Cebulski has done a pretty good job overall. And even, in the the more executive roles that he has to fulfill. You know, like when we went to the Marvel Fanfare panel at New York Comic Con this past year, I mean, I don't know if you remember the question that I threw at him in Claremont, but he fielded it really well, and in a way that didn't necessarily feel super phoned home as a lot of people in executive positions at comic book publishers do. So I give him a lot of credit. And, you know, it's there's a reason that I'm applying to work and learn under Marvel. So,
and yeah, that's right. And I don't want to, you know, I don't want to hit a guy when he's down with respect to with respect to Dan Didio, but I do think that C.B. Cebluski does have a way of he's got a more genuine passion. Dan Didio always sounded like a politician. He always sounded like a politician when he spoke, and he said the same paragraphs over and over again about talking about sensibilities and good this, good that. Cebluski does seem to have more of a more grounded experience. He is a former Marvel writer and editor. When C.B. Cebluski did his background, there was a minor controversy a couple of months in from his tenure because he did in fact write under a pen name, and he actually arguably was accused of defrauding Marvel by writing under a Japanese name for a period of time in 2003 and 2005. But he shouldered that very well, and the fact of the matter is that he focused on writing the ship, and he focused on getting the things back on track, and he immediately changed the atmosphere of Marvel Comics. And one of the first things he did is that he made it very clear that, you know, look, to the writers, you got to get your online personality. You got to reel that stuff in. You got to watch what you say online. And if you don't watch what you say online, then there's going to be problems, because one of the things I noticed, if I think back what Marvel did in 2017, I mean, you had Dan Slott online, making a fool out of himself, you know, engaging all the people that were against him. Slott, I mean, he became his own meme. I mean, I actually created Dan Slott memes along with a whole slew of others. I mean, he created. I mean, he literally would. I mean, it was considered a badge of honor by some Marvel readers to be Slott botted. Like if you were blocked by Dan Slott, this is the guy that was writing Spider-Man and doing and dare I say, I think he was doing a good job, by the way. I mean, it was during his 10-year run. The guy's a very good writer, but
debatable.
Well, no,
it's had its ups and downs.
Right.
Run.
Fair enough, but I will say this: you're not helping your matter when you're portraying yourself like the Green Goblin online, and, you know, castigating anyone who might not like your particular run or be criticizing you. I mean, and just to give some credit to, we got to give some credit to the writers here. And I actually, in particular, I'm going to just put it up here. Donny Cates online is fantastic. He loves his fans, and it shows. Kelly Thompson, writer of Captain Marvel, she's always online thanking fans, engaging, being jovial, being sarcastic, being funny. Matthew Rosenberg's also very good.
Matthew Rosenberg is one of my favorite people to interact with on Twitter. He's so nice. He's so genuine. He goes out of his way. Like when when Donnie was kind of starting his war on pirating comics. Yeah, Matthew Rosenberg, obviously, he was like, it's wrong, but, if you can't afford my book and you want to like read my book, he's like, I'll help you try to find a way to get it. And Rosenberg like even gave away a couple copies of books and signed them and went out of his way to do that. And like around Christmas time, he did something similar. He's like, hey, if you have a comic book fan and you can't afford to buy them a gift, let me know. It was like, how fucking nice can you be? Like, how much better can you be to your fans? Yeah. Not to mention he's a very talented writer. When we did our bringing Marvel over to DC, I put him on Detective Comics. Mm-hmm. And if I think that you would do a great job and I'm ready to give a full-throated approval on you writing Batman, you better bet that I have the utmost confidence in you. So Matthew Rosenberg, listen, I ship him as an institution, man. I love that guy, both as a writer and as a face of Marvel's creative bullpen. Yeah.
I agree. And another guy that was also very good online and funny is Chip Zdarsky. Mm. And I think Marvel has sort of understood the lesson they learned from 2017 was that, you know, you can still write good comic books. You can still have diversity without the politics. You can have the best of both worlds if you do it right. You can still have online active writers without, you know, they don't need to talk about their politics. They can just talk about their stories and engage the fans without necessarily provoking them. And I realize that there's an extra onus on writers here for that, but the writers have a lot of power, and it really, really shows well for Marvel that they fundamentally, I think they come across better online. There's always some hiccups there, but for the most part, their online presence, their creators and their writers, their creative teams, even Jonathan Hickman, when he doesn't post a lot on Twitter, but when he does, he always has a point. He's got some sarcasm, he's got some humor, and it's a really good, it's a good position to be in, especially when you're heralding Dawn of X.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I do want to discuss too, you brought up politics, and I know it's a touchy subject in comics, but I think there's a way to approaching it, because comic books from their inception are inherently political, and there's no denying it, and I'll die on that hill, and I'll argue that to the fucking end of time. But there's certainly a way to approaching it, and a way of talking about kind of the civics of being a superhero and how that interacts with society, without pointing fingers at anybody. So I will say, like, there is a place for politics in comics, but it's less on the political side and more on just being civil, right? Like being a good human being. And I think that's something to take note of, because I think a lot of people go out of their way to say comics aren't political, and they kind of inherently are. I mean, that's something that is kind of been imprinted into comics from their inception. So well, I think it's important, but I see where you're going, and I think, you know, at least what I can only interpret that you're trying to get at is that there's certainly a way of approaching those type of topical stances.
Let me approach it another way, because really what I'm trying, I think all of this flowed from the shelving or the de-emphasizing of the classic characters. That created a huge problem for Marvel. You know, the idea of replacing your core characters with something else, with a new character. You know, it's a very difficult thing to do. If you're going to replace Batman with Dick Grayson, that's one thing. If you're going to replace Iron Man with Riri Williams, well, maybe that's quite another thing. Or at least maybe it isn't, but therein lies the controversy. Let me ask you this. When you look back at 2017, do you think that this is just a bunch of hogwash? It was just blown out of proportion, and people just should have, you know, maybe taken a pill and relaxed? Or do you think that there was something to be said about how Marvel sort of de-emphasized their classic characters, and whether or not that was a good idea?
Well, there's, you know, I think that legacy is an important thing, and eventually kind of letting other characters take these reins, because otherwise, or at least have that level of spotlight in that platform, because otherwise there's literally no purpose in creating them besides being tangential and supportive. But there's certainly a way of handling it, right? There's a reason why when, Grant Morrison made Dick Grayson Batman, why, for the most part, it was widely accepted, because it was an organic process, right? Like, we were able to take this character and put him on that platform without it feeling forced. And that was the big thing over at Marvel at the time, was that they might have had good intentions, but they were doing it totally inorganically, that really had poor consequences on the story, right? You look at what Jason Aaron did with Lady Thor. I don't care what anybody says. It's very clear that there was a story reason for that, right? Jason Aaron was building this and weaving this into his overall massive kind of spanning Thor narrative. Whereas other creators had other reasons. And it was very obvious to tell that on a number of occasions, including Riri Williams, that it wasn't for story. There was no purpose story-wise. There was no point in adding perspective narratively to the universe. There was no point in using that character as a way to interact with the other characters in the universe. It wasn't. There was nothing authentic about it in terms of progressing some part of the MCU, not the movie MCU, the comics MCU, I'm sorry, I shouldn't even said the C, the Marvel universe. Whereas, and again, Tevye, for example, brings up like Laura X-23. She's a character that's been developed for years.
Right.
So what happens when you take that shot and you quote unquote kill Logan for a little bit? Yeah, of course people are going to like it because it's been an organic build, because that character has earned their right to step up to that mantle and to, not only kind of prove themselves as their own character, but to provide a significance as to their role under that mantle in comparison to their predecessor. So, I obviously, I think it was a huge blunder in 2017. Were there some instances then that I think were warranted? Yeah, of course. I think Jane Foster Thor was excellent. To be honest with you, it might even be my favorite part of the run.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I actually even think that, like you mentioned, X-23, Laura Kinney, she was also I think a success. I think Marvel had mixed successes, but I think you hit the nail on the head about it's about developing those diverse characters organically, and tying into the question: can DC Comics learn anything from that? And they absolutely can. This is my concern about 5G, is that if suddenly over the next 5 months we're going to get 5G one shots, generation 1 through 5, and then suddenly we're forced to accept the Captain Boomerang's son as the next Flash, that's going to be an absolute utter failure because there's no organic build to that story. That's my biggest concern about 5G. If they're just going to plop down 5th generation characters right out of the blue, introduce them immediately, and all of a sudden they're replacing the existing characters for DC. If suddenly Barry Allen, Wally West, they're all replaced by Captain Boomerang's son as the Flash, that will be a disaster. And by the way, this is something the Big Two has done before. They are both notorious for not learning from each other's mistakes. It's like they'll both make the same mistakes despite the fact that the other one just made it. And there's example after example of that over the last 20 years. I won't bore people with it, but suffice to say that I hope DC, I'd like to think that Dan Didio was fired because people maybe saw the writing on the wall here, that this 5G, maybe that was one of the reasons that, look, 5G isn't going to work. If people want 5G, if you want these newer characters, diverse characters, these just different characters for the DC universe, you got to develop them organically, and you can't do it by simply introducing them in an event and then suddenly give them their own titles. And again, you can't replace the classic characters. You still need the classic characters to lead. That's what Marvel failed to do in it prior to 2017. That's why Axel Alonso, that was his most epic failure. And then to make it worse, Marvel did one thing that was so much worse than that. They not only sidelined their classic characters, but then they blamed the fans for being racist.
Yeah, that was,
or they impliedly did so. And now they insist that they never did that, but they absolutely did, because I can show you tweets from Jordan Peterson, from Trevor Brevoort, the editors at Marvel. I mean, they did that. They did that through their silence. They did that through their inherent contempt on Twitter. They showed that. Now what they have done since then under C.B. Cebulski. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. They've quieted down. I think that at the end of the day, they understand how even if they truly feel that way, you don't want to let your fans know you feel that way. I mean, there is something to be said about having a corporate PR campaign to avoid the PR disaster that existed for 10 months out of 12 in 2017. And it's hard not for me to look at C.B. Cebluski and say, you know what, buddy, you've done a good job. I think he's done a really good job overall. And I think the way that he's handled the writers and the creators And listening to them online, I think Marvel right now, with all their publications, they have a passion about them. They're recruiting, they're publishing more titles. They're not replacing classic characters. They're creating 10 more comic books. Now, I think, go ahead.
The thing too is just to look at how they're pooling talent. You have guys that have been exclusive to DC for 10 plus years that are coming over and starting to trickle in and do some work for Marvel. Some heavy hitters, might I add. Tony Daniel's been doing covers for Spider-Man, for Star Wars. Fucking Lee Bermejo, who has been at DC as like longer than I've been reading comics. Coming over and doing covers for them. So it's there's got to be something to be said about how whatever they're doing behind the scenes to network. And I know Lee Bermejo, kind of has a reason based on how they treated him, but Tony Daniel doesn't have as far as we know, a huge grievance with DC Comics, and Marvel was able to, start bringing him over. Look at Patrick Gleason, just signed an exclusive contract with Marvel less than a year ago. And he was real hot at DC doing what he was doing with Peter Tomasi. So, and he's on Spider-Man, which is, one of Marvel's marquee books. So aside from like the politics of it all, they're doing something right behind the scenes to get these creators in there. And not only obviously people from DC, but indie creators. Everybody forgets that 3 years ago, Donny Cates was just a hot indie creator, with God Country and Baby Teeth and Redneck and all that stuff. So, it's really interesting to see how that's going on and how they're kind of building the Marvel's creative pool.
And as a build onto that, because I think we've made that point clear. What I want to ask you about is, and I know that you're someone who you read a lot of comic books digitally, but you also buy them. And I'm curious to know. I was trying to come up with some of the changes I've noticed under C.B. Cebluski and we've all noticed them. And that is one of them in particular is I think that Marvel is catering to the speculator market wonderfully. I love what they're doing with second printings. They're including the speculators in a way that they've never done before with their second printings. Like DC will just change the shade or the background of their second printings, whereas Marvel will reprint a page from the interior of the comic book, and they'll rock the boat. And we speculators, we love that. So it's not only the collectors that are getting excited with Marvel now because there's more to collect, but they're challenging the speculators. And it's more exciting to collect Marvel right now as a speculator than it is to collect DC, because there's just, other than Batman 89 with Punchline, which really even their second printing on Batman 89 with Punchline, all they did was they changed the shading of Batman 89. It goes from a blue shading to a red shading. It's really boring as hell. It's like DC hasn't caught on that, one way to interact with fans and to create excitement is not only with the stories, but how you package the product and how you do your second printings and third printings. I was wondering if what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I mean, you know me, I'm very against the kind of state of comics where speculators drive the market over good stories. But I think that Cebulski's found a good compromise because Marvel is also telling some really good stories. I mean, we're in a world where, heck, Immortal Hulk was outselling Batman for like a year, and it probably still will be for a little while.
And not only that, it was Immortal Hulk that I think changed the speculator game a little bit. It got speculators more excited than ever before because for once, this was not only a comic book that there was different covers and multiple printings with different covers and first cover appearances and everything else, but the story actually warranted the hype that went along with the variant covers, and that's very rare to find.
Well, yeah, and I think that again, there's this interesting compromise, right? And it's one that I as somebody who I'm against speculation driving the market because I think that quality stories. Okay, if you're gonna tell me wrong, Immortal Hulk was outselling Batman. You can go look at the Comic-Con sales numbers.
There was a couple months where Immortal Hulk was technically doing more. That was during Tom King's downward trend. It just was Immortal Hulk was trending up. There was a time when there was 1 month, and
there were multiple months.
Yeah.
So if you say so, sweet pea. But anyways. I think that Marvel's found a really good compromise at bringing that extra incentive in to buy more than the first printing while also telling really good stories. You know, we're not making these sales spikes because Marvel is trying to capture this big spectacle, like, I don't know, making Captain America a Nazi. And I think that that's ultimately what drove that story into being an absolute mess. I don't hate the premise of incorporating something like that as a big plot point, but I hated the fact that Empire or Secret Empire literally, you know, and Marvel pushed this, became this thing that was fueled by Nazi Captain America, a spectacle. So I think that Marvel is finding a really great compromise at telling the stories they need to tell and finding other reasons to get the speculators in, rather than these small story details that don't end up fleshing out to be anything other than something to make sales. You know what I mean? Like, they're finding other reasons to drive those speculator sales in that don't involve, you know, lackluster story.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing, because obviously there is a collector's market.
Yeah.
There is a realm where me, somebody who is making these claims, will go out and buy, you know, an A variant and a B variant because I love a cover or for whatever such reason. So, you know,
I noticed there was when I was doing some research for our live stream, I came across a tweet by C.B. Cebluski. Did I say that right? Is it Cebluski or Cebluski?
Cebulski.
Cebulski. All right. Cebulski. All right. So then I think it's actually spelt wrong then, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It wrong.
Yeah.
Apologies to Cebluski. It's Cebulski.
Bull. Think of the animal, the bull.
Yeah. He tweeted that new writers he tweeted that when he noticed that when they get a gig, their first gig at Marvel or DC, that they try to squeeze multiple subplots over a couple of issues because they're so passionate in their writing. And basically, he was trying to say, like, you got to calm down, you got to focus your thoughts and just focus on telling one story at a time. And I think that was part. It's very clear at that time that they're recruiting. Marvel is definitely recruiting. They seem to be on a recruitment drive, and I guess you would probably know that yourself because you're maybe got some hopes that you got your own hopes in that department, Dark Knight. And I'm just wondering, for someone who maybe is out there and maybe looking, is Marvel a little bit more receptive, or how's DC in terms of catering to the looking for new writers right now or editors?
Well, I mean, before I answer that question, somebody said Batman sold 80K in January. Looking at Comic-Con right now, Batman sold 56,000 copies. I'm sorry, at its best, 61 at best. And it is to be taken note that it sold 61,000 copies when Tynan stepped up, and less when Tom King was on it. So, yeah, let's bring that out for a second. Anyways. Yeah, I mean, admittedly, you know, DC it was very difficult to kind of try to get in touch with, in terms of trying to break into some sort of role and even like an internship style role and learn from them. You know, I had some really fortunate interaction, I think 2 years ago around New York Comic Con, of dealing with DC's PR, and they were gracious enough to give me interviews with their creators, and it was a really nice experience. But the minute that, you know, I started looking at, you know, becoming an assistant to their editors, you know, it became quite difficult. And DC, frankly, when this time around at New York Comic Con, when I was networking for a more creative role, was pretty much impossible to try to get a hold to. Whereas, you know, I ask one, maybe, you know, when we were at that Marvel Fanfare panel, I'd like to think that I asked Cebulski confirmed it, which was nice, but he, you know, I had asked a question that I don't think a lot of people ask at those panels. And when I approached him, he was, you know, kind enough to kind of humor me, and we discussed it a little bit. And he said, you know, people don't usually ask those types of questions, and I really appreciate you for that. And I, you know, talked to him about wanting to break my way in the industry, and he gave me, I mean, you were there. You took the famous snapshot.
Yeah.
And he was kind enough to forward me his information. And yeah, so Marvel since then has been very accessible. You know, he put me in touch with the right people to talk to, and you know, I've had my phone interview, and we'll soon be going up into their offices to interview for a position. And you know, whether or not I get the job, I can't deny how much easier and how much more pleasurable the experience has been. You know, reaching out to Marvel.
Yeah, that's well, you know, it's interesting because you got to wonder because the atmosphere is something that's very important. And one of the things that I think it's obvious that CB had, I mean, we don't know. We're not flies on the wall in Marvel Comics, and we're not flies on the wall in the offices of DC Comics, but we do know at the offices of DC Comics right now are probably a little bit there's some tension there, and there's some wrinkles that they're working out. And you know, Dan Didio was fired for fostering a bad work environment. That was actually specifically stated. That we know. That appears to be, I believe, factual. That was what we understand to be the case. DC has had editors leaving, and now we don't know specifically why they left, but one could again guess that, you know, they quit 3 or 4 months ago, followed by DC or Dan Didio being fired. And then when you look at what Marvel's been doing under
You can do it.
So Cebulski.
Bolski. Think of the
Cebulski. Okay, there we go. Cebulski. Boy, that's a tough name.
I think it was Tell Hillam 29 who put up the yeah, there you go. He put it up in the comments, the proper pronunciation. So maybe you can keep it up there for reference.
Okay, I'll put it up in the comments here. I got all kinds of there we go. Let me see. I'm gonna change it here.
For your reference, my friend.
Well, the problem is that there's that it corrects itself. I don't know why.
Well, I think something to be said is that, you know, the Marvel has got to be doing something right internally that is making these creators feel welcome and feel like they want to be a part of that creative line. You know, I mean, Donny Cates was offered fucking Batman and he turned it down. So and he talks about it all the time, and he's very transparent, which I can appreciate, is that he talks about how Batman is one of his favorite characters, and how when he was young, Batman was like one of the books that got him into comics.
Yeah.
And I mean, in no world do I think, you know, unless there are other circumstances, that I would turn down writing Batman, the main title. And clearly Marvel's got to be doing something right, because I can't help but feel that that's a difficult opportunity to pass up. And obviously, you know, with his success, I don't doubt that he'll have that opportunity eventually, but there's something to be said about that.
Well, and you know, it's really sad too. Now, I don't know, Donny Cates is like the Jeff Johns at Marvel. He seems to have he just seems to really understand Marvel history very well, their continuity very well. At least I'm not a Marvel zombie, but I don't know a lot of Marvel zombies who are complaining about Donny Cates' knowledge of the Marvel universe by any stretch of the imagination. They love his work. And to be quite frank, DC, I don't think DC particularly cares about any writer's knowledge of the DC universe. That's been one of DC's problems. I think Marvel wanted to keep Donny Cates because they knew they had a gem on their hands, and they hope they're paying him accordingly. This guy,
that's a big editorial thing. That is a huge editorial thing, because if you're letting certain things slip past your readers, I mean, the fact that, what was it? Snyder, that the current run of Justice League under Venditti, who I love Robert Venditti, is occurring before Scott Snyder's entire Justice League run that has been happening for 2 years.
Yeah.
So we're going this far back? Like, that's, I mean, whether or not this is an interim period before you do whatever the hell you're going to do in the summer for your big publishing initiative, I mean, that's a huge editorial oversight, because what happens to the stakes in your story? Why could you just not equally say this happened somewhere in between? This happened somewhere after? Like,
yeah.
That's a huge blunder. And I listened to Donny Cates. He has a podcast with Ryan Stegman that I really, really enjoy. And it's where I get that information from, about Donny talking about having been offered Batman. And Oh shit, I forgot where I was going with this. What was I saying?
Sorry, man. I'm just I'm getting lost here in the chats.
Oh, somebody in the chat, remind me where I was going with this. I don't remember. I'm not gonna lie. I'm pretty lost. I know I said something about the podcast, but I too looked at the live comments and immediately forgot what I was saying.
But yeah, well, my frustration with DC is they clearly have had no focus. And one of the advantages that CB brought when he brought his passion and he brought his determination to recruit writers, to publish, he did the best of both worlds.
I remember now.
He focused on that diversity. He got the titles out. They're publishing more titles, and they're creating an environment where the writers want to stay, and they're beholden to the continuity, and they're building on the continuity, which is the total opposite of what DC is doing. They're not respecting their continuity.
Can I get this out real quick before I forget? Because I'm like pounded with caffeine right now. It's an editorial issue, and through that podcast, I remember where I was going now. Through that podcast, Donnie was talking about how when he was originally going towards pitching his Venom and then again onto his Thor, both of them being big, broad runs that will affect a lot of change, there were a couple of situations where, he's like, can I use this? Can I do this? And he had explicitly mentioned how his editors were like, no, this can't happen because this is going on, which is like something that DC clearly is not doing with their editorial staff. And I've talked about this with you on a number of occasions and on a number of streams, Comic Boom, but oh boy, a nice blue dot on my face. DC had way too many people running the ship in terms of how many writers they're giving control of their universe at once. At any given point over the last 2 years, there were like 4 people shepherding huge universe-wide changes. And I mean, A, tonally, that's a mistake. But B, just in terms of pure continuity, how do you reconcile that without coming off like you made huge mistakes? I mean, at any given point over the last 2 years or so, we had Tom King doing his Heroes in Crisis thing. We had Jeff Johns doing his Doomsday Clock thing. Scott Snyder doing his Justice League Metal thing. Bendis doing whatever the hell Bendis is doing. And that says something, right? Because there was no editorial control. There was no one saying, oh, hey, no, we can't make John 17 because he's out here doing things with Damian. Like, we can't do that. Or, I don't know, we can't make Wally West a murderer because we just brought him back as DC's hope and a symbol of DC's legacy. But hey, I don't know. I'm not a professional editor.
And look what and you look over at Marvel. You look at what Donny Cates, what he's doing with what he did with Absolute Carnage, Guardians of the Galaxy, Thor, Silver Surfer, Venom, and that's not inconsistent with what Jason Aaron's doing on the Avengers. It's not inconsistent with what Al Ewing's doing on Immortal Hulk. The idea, especially Immortal Hulk issue 25, or Immortal Hulk might actually be a world eater or a universe eater or some damn thing. There's such big concepts, but it all is, you can tell that there's some sort of narrative thread tying it all together there, and it is impressive. You absolutely do not get that at DC. Right now, it's a mess. We have Superman, Batman, inconsistent with Hell Arisen, and then we got what inconsistent with Justice League issue 39, that ending, moving now into Death Metal, and it's one giant kind of mess. And plus, now we're supposed to believe that there's 5G, and we're going to be getting a slew of new characters into 5G that have not been organically grown. This, I got to tell you, the more I'm talking, excuse me, the more I'm organizing my thoughts, listening to you talk about what Marvel's doing right, thinking about it, I'm more worried about DC than ever before, and it's very, very obvious to me why Dan Didio got fired.
Yeah, and something I want to address in the chat, Ashon Comics and Wows were talking about, Marvel still having its continuity mistakes in terms of like what characters are doing in present day. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's definitely better than what DC is doing. Let's make that comparison real quick. When you have 4 people making huge continuity breaking decisions, that are each individual to one another versus, you know, somebody brings up, you know, Elektra having an affair with somebody or whatever. Like, yes, it's important. It is very important to get all of this stuff in line, but that's small potatoes compared to the editorial inconsistencies in the continuity from DC. So I just wanted to qualify that. Okay. What was your question again, Boom? Now I'll answer that.
My question was about, geez, now I forgot what I said.
It's because we're alcoholics talking about comic books.
I just finished my spiced rum.
Yeah, my Irish coffee is shot.
No, I was just commenting on how Donny Cates, Al Ewing, Jason Aaron, they have their own kingdoms, but they're all unified. They're all together. They're all allies in the fight for a cause of a good story. Whereas DC is not that at all. They got their different kingdoms and they don't care. And you really get a sense that they don't like each other. You really get a sense that you get a sense that Tom King doesn't talk to Snyder. You absolutely get a sense that Bendis is ostracized. No, Bendis talks to nobody. He doesn't listen to editors. He doesn't care what's going on in other books. He's mixing everything together. It's clear that Bendis is hoping that 5G is going to explain all this nonsense away. He had a god-awful this week. I mean, he actually thinks that people want Connor Kent to meet John Kent. No, I want Connor Kent dead. I didn't want Connor Kent back. Nobody wanted him back as far as I was aware. We didn't need him back.
I think Connor Kent has a place. I think just as you're exploring, or as we did explore, Clark being a father to John, what happened? I mean, first of all, it's interesting enough to explore Connor in this new dynamic, in this new universe, readjusting himself to this new context, and B, what would Connor be like as a big brother? So I think I respectfully think that there's a place for Connor Kent.
Well, sure there is. I guess, but my criticism is, and this is huge, is you don't use a character for the sake of using a character because you think it's cool.
Oh yeah,
it has to fit in the environment. It has to fit in the continuity. And Marvel, what Marvel does so well is that clearly there's a Marvel Bible that people have to become accustomed to, and they know that you can't just pull something out of your ass and expect that you're going to be able to use this character, that character. There's got to be some plausible way. You got to have some explanation for it. Marvel is so much better than Marvel. Under Dan Didio clearly reached a point where he didn't give a damn. And that's what pisses me off. And it shows, and he got fired. And man, I actually feel so much better now that I'm feeling so much better. More and more I talk about that. This, DC, look, in less than 2 years, Marvel righted their ship, the disaster that they were in from 2017. DC can too, but they've got to hire somebody. They got to get Johns in there, somebody. But we'll see what happens.
Well, I mean, ultimately, one big thing to discuss is, what is spectacle, and it's important over story. Right. You talk about them bringing John Kent, them bringing this, that, and the other thing back. It was very clear that in Bendis's Young Justice, which I happen to like the first issue. Mm-hmm. I mean, my liking the book stopped there. But you can very much tell, as much as I like that first issue, is that he brought those characters back to get some of the 90s babies into reading his book. And there was no reason otherwise, Firstly, suddenly Tim Drake is Robin again. I mean, he had established himself kind of back in a more classic looking costume, but he was still Red Robin under Tynion and under prior continuity, even in a localized space. And then, he brings back Connor and Cassie Sandsmark. For what? Yeah. What was the story reason? That's why it failed. There was nothing. There was no substance. That's the issue. Is that publishers are using spectacle to drive sales. And you know what? Maybe if you could just establish a history of excellent story that serves the world, the characters, and whatever fucking narrative you're trying to depart onto the reader, maybe you'll just build fans who want to come back and read your books. I mean, for Christ's sakes, Sandman got to a point where it was DC's #1 selling book. Isn't that nuts? Isn't that a little bit nuts? Like, Sandman is this very kind of esoteric, like very, very high fantasy literature based character that is inherently not comic books. But what happened? You got people in there, Neil Gaiman and his plethora of artists, to come in there and tell excellent stories. And they built an audience for that book. That's insane. That's unheard of now.
Yeah.
Like, maybe if you just have an editorial consensus, maybe if you just get writers in there with a vision and in tandem with editorial and their art staff, they can just tell good stories and build a market that way.
That a good follow through on that is the latest example of a great story elevating a character that people had thought maybe had become a little stale was Immortal Hulk. And I would argue that one of the fantastic things about Immortal Hulk is that so many writers complain about the continuity of a character and they say it hinders their writing to explore different ideas. It was precisely because Immortal Hulk has such a convoluted continuity. It's the continuity that actually adds to Al Ewing's writing because he incorporates all of it. And that just means there's no such thing as a bad character. It's a bad writer.
And on that, if I could elaborate, the thing that kills me when people talk about how continuity kills story is that, well, maybe if we had some editorial control, you wouldn't be letting bad writers contribute to the continuity, right? Like, you put people in there that want to tell stories in respect to the character, you might have a more solid continuity to play from. Look at all of the best stories in comics in the modern years. Of course, some of them are going off and charting their own paths, but a majority of them show a lot of respect and homage to a character's history. Continuity, listen, if you want to tell your story out of continuity, there's Elseworlds. There's What If stories. There's Black Label, whatever the hell you want to make it.
That's exactly right.
But you have to know the medium that you're working in. I'm not writing a film script if I want to sell a novel. If you want to write a comic book, there's something to be said about breaking the boundaries of the medium, and that's how you progress. But there's also something to be said about knowing the medium that you're working with and playing to its strengths. Comic books, especially Marvel and DC's main lines, have a continuity that is rich, ripe with character, story, and overall narrative vision. Play to that. I mean, why do you think some of the best writers who have made their marks on the industry have not only taken characters with convoluted or odd continuities, but they've retconned those odd things to make them work? Look at Grant Morrison.
Okay.
Say what you
cutting
want.
Off their
Oh, did I?
Sorry, guys. I think we're cut off from Dark Knight.
Can you hear me?
Not sure what's going on.
Hello?
But hopefully, are you back?
I can see and hear you. Can you see and hear me?
Yeah, you were just cut off there. You can finish your train of thought there. You were just cut off briefly for a minute there. I don't know what happened.
Where did I get cut off?
I'm not sure. You were just finish your point. I'm not. You were right mid sentence. I couldn't tell. You were on my end. It went black, and then I was trying to get you back.
That's weird. I've seen you the whole time. Ash on Comics says he could see and hear me without interruption. So
Okay.
That's odd. I don't know. I saw and heard you the whole time. But point being is that continuity is a wealth, right, of story and a wealth of potential that you can build and elaborate upon. Mm-hmm. And you see some of the best architects in comics taking continuity and doing something with it, reinterpreting it for modern times, right? Because obviously there are going to be things that don't age super well in continuity over time. But you get guys like Grant Morrison who take a fifth dimensional imp Batmite and make it a psychological kind of defense system for Batman. And it's awesome. It's so good. It's so logical. Look at what he did with Kate Kane and the original Kate Kane, not like Kate Kane Batwoman, but like Catherine Kane, the original Batwoman from like the Silver Age. Super convoluted history. What did Grant Morrison do? Made her this crazy badass secret fucking super spy that we find out has been protecting Bruce out of love for him for years. How cool is that? You take a character that nobody cares about and that is convoluted in history, and you reshape that history. Like, there's so many great opportunities. And I think that as soon as talented writers start looking at it as a hindrance and realizing what you can do with it and your ability to reshape it, that's when you get.
And I think the problem though is that most writers don't read comic books.
Oh, that's an issue.
The vast majority don't, and it's painfully obvious that they don't. And it can be a problem. But here's the thing and this is what Dan Didio focused on. Dan Didio focused on, he loved the writers that were not beholden to continuity. He even promoted it. That was the whole point of the New 52, that everybody
more DCU, I think.
Well, even the New 52, the New 52 was continuity over story, and they lost a connection to the characters. And there was lots of examples. There was nothing about the New 52. That's a complete myth. I don't care. I'll argue with anybody on it. The New 52 was not beholden to the previous continuity. It was all aborted. It was all new. That was part of the problem. And
unless you were Batman or Green Lantern.
Well, but that's only because there were big names on there. That was only because Johns was a big name. That was the only reason. And Snyder was so successful. But everybody else had to do something different. And then lo and behold, that created the confusion. Again, it wasn't a full publishing wide tone and sensibility for the entire line. It was like, oh, Johns, okay, you can do what you want because it's working. Oh, okay, Batman, you can do what you want, and don't worry about continuity. Oh, the other guys, sky's the limit. You can do whatever you want. That's the problem. There's a reason why Rebirth worked, and unfortunately, why was Rebirth abandoned? It was really simple. It was abandoned because Didio just went with whatever worked. He instead of telling Snyder with metal, saying, look, this can fit with Rebirth. All you got to do is tweak this and tweak that. Instead of challenging the writers and saying, look, this is the tone, just tweak here and tweak there. There were so many storylines, you have no idea, where I could tell you that the story would not have to be hurt, and all they have to do is tweak this or tweak that, and it would fit. Or you could change the ending here to give it a little bit more hope here, a little bit there. There's so much you can do if you had a continuity editor. And with the Bible, with the Marvel Bible that writers are following, you create passion. I mean, look, if you say to a great writer, look, this is what's happened in this with the X-Men over the last 10 years. Spend 5 hours with them on a Sunday and go through it and say, this is all that's happened, ideas from that. But you got to do that. I don't see them doing that at DC. I see them throwing shit at a wall and hoping something sticks. And that's a problem. That's a problem. And that's what they got to stop. And I think that's what CB put an end to when he came in and he said, you know what, enough is enough. We're bringing back these classic characters. And guess what? Does anybody even know what Riri Williams is doing now? Well, she's Ironheart. And she's good. She's her own character now. But she's not Iron Man. And thank God.
Yeah.
She never worked as Iron Man.
Well, and you got to be mindful and look at what sticks. I mean, there's a reason... Although Kamala Khan was kind of part of that broad sweep of the diversity characters, why does Kamala Khan stick? Well, because ultimately she's a solid character with an interesting perspective on the MCU that kind of, in a way, translates parts of ours. And not to mention, what did they do with her predecessor? Well, they didn't kill her and make her, her AI be the only walking presence they have in the universe. They gave Carol a new mantle. They opened up a new mantle so that we could provide legacy for that line of character. And I think it's very simple. You look at these characters that have worked, right? That are considered legacy characters, right? That have become newly imparted onto the universe. Why does Miles work? Well, I mean, part of it is because of the circumstance of the Ultimate Universe, but Miles works because he's entirely a different character, and they didn't try to kill something off that felt like they were trying to make a permanent stamp, right? Marvel made the Ultimate Universe. Not only did they allow Peter Parker to exist, but he had a fully fleshed out story in the Ultimate Universe. And then they gave Miles his due. And I personally think they're doing Miles a disservice by keeping him into the main continuity. I think he should be the Spider-Man of his own universe because he's a great hero and he deserves that opportunity to develop. But that's just me. But again, you look at Kamala Khan, great character. different voice, has a different interpretation as to what this mantle of Captain Marvel means, and she's going to operate on that.
Yeah.
Look at Jane Foster. Although she's not Thor anymore, she's been given new life as Valkyrie. That's how you create these characters and let them thrive. You make it organic, and you don't throw away what came before just to give them a spotlight.
And what's even more frustrating with DC is that if you want to explore different stories, they haven't even used their one mechanism by which they could do so. And that is, they haven't even utilized hyper time. They haven't told an Elseworld story in decades. And they haven't used the multiverse to the extent that they can. If Dan Didio really was that, if he really embraced story over continuity and he didn't care about continuity, why didn't you say this story takes place on another Earth? Why not have if you want to tell a story of a different type of Superman, or put him on a different Earth 23 or Earth.
I think even just to boil it down to its simplest kind of contingents, if you want story over continuity, why the fuck aren't you telling good stories? That's a huge part of it. You're not even telling good stories.
That's right.
Make that sacrifice, make the stories good.
Yeah. And that goes into the whole aspect of, you got to get the writers that are really passionate about these characters, and they've got to, but like you said, how do you, I'm just so fed up, and it's so frustrating that they can't. I have to lay the blame at Dan Didio. I have to, because they're not hiring the quality of the stories that they're building on. It's just not there. It's not there. And it's really sad. There's, what characters have they really organically developed at DC over the last 10 years? I mean, really organically developed.
And look what they did to them.
It's way fewer than the Marvel characters. Way fewer. So
look at what happened. Look at how things have transpired. Look at what they did to Jonathan Kent, a character that everybody loved. Everybody. He was like, aside from Wally West, he was a face of Rebirth. I mean, God, and even to an extent, I know this character has very mixed favor from a lot of people. But look at Damian. Right? Like you read the books that Damian is well known to have been in. What did they do? They started developing the character. Look at Batman and Robin by Tomasi. Oh, you guys can't see because Hulk is right there. Hi, Hulk. Batman and Robin by Gleason and Tomasi. Even when they bring Damian into the Superman run, Batman and Robin by Morrison. What are you doing with these characters? Well, you're developing them. Damian, when he was first introduced, was pretty universally hated by Bat fans. By the time you finish those two Batman and Robin runs, I think that you can at least say there's been a huge dent in the people that went from disliking Damian to at least being okay with Damian. And there's something to be said about that. When Damian was first introduced, I was indifferent. I love Damian. I absolutely love Damian, and think that what they're doing with him now in terms of not giving him that spotlight he deserves is a huge disservice. I think he's a great character. I think the fact that he is a little asshole gives him a lot of room to develop and grow, and I want to watch that. I mean, there are characters like that you could develop, that you can make that generational leap. And again, I've said this on prior podcasts too. If you want to talk about organically giving new characters platforms, you have a wealth of incredible legacy characters that you have organically developed over years.
Yes.
If you want to give them that platform, because let's be real, it's going to be temporary anyways. We know we're going to get Clark, Bruce, and Diana back in those roles eventually. So if we do it right, I'm entirely okay with organically letting characters step up to those positions. Why are we going supposedly to Captain Boomerang's third fucking cousin twice removed and some random Amazon and Luke Fox's Batman when we have Dick, when we have Wally, when we have Donna Troy, or even the next echelon of characters, or the next. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me, because not only have we developed a fan base for these characters and an actual kind of plausible reason for them to take these mantles, they still have plenty of room to grow because we don't know what these characters are like in this new context, in those new roles.
And all of those characters can be developed. And if you want to develop a 5th generation of heroes, give them their own Earth. Why not have an Earth? Give them Earth 7 or Earth 8, whatever. Give them. There's 7 unknown. There's 7 universes in the 52 universes. Out of the 52 Earths, there are 7 that are still technically unknown, unclassified. Give them one of them, create a 5th generation of heroes, relegate them to that Earth, and have an annual crossover. Give them 4 or 5 comic books. Expand your publishing line. If you want to have a Flash, if you want to have, I don't care. I do believe that there is something to be said about diversity. Okay, I do believe that every child, every race, we live in times where we bloody well should have a black superhero. We should have more black superheroes. We should have more Japanese heroes. We should have more diversity amongst our superhero characters. I believe that.
I do too.
But I absolutely don't believe that we should be replacing our characters and say such nonsense as, well, you know, Superman isn't a person. He's just he's a ephemeral representation of no nonsense. He's actually Clark Kent, and yeah, he's a white guy. Sorry. If you want to have a black Superman, okay, but then give him his own Earth so that way you're not insulting him. That way you have Kelvin, I forget his last name, in Earth 23. He's the black Superman who's president of the United States.
Yeah, he's basically Super Obama. Yeah.
You don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. You can have the best of both worlds. And DC has done a horrible job understanding the concept of their own multiverse, and they haven't utilized it. The only person that truly understood that was Grant Morrison, and all those wonderful ideas that Grant Morrison had in Multiversity, DC's done nothing with it.
Yeah.
Every now and then, you know, Scott Snyder references it a bit in his Justice League run, and occasionally you'll see guest stars here and there. But for the most part, it's been DC has done a really bad job building on the really good ideas that they do have. And I do think it's they've got to have writers that are aware of what the continuity is, and they need somebody in there. And you know what? DC should be radical. They should hire some fans. Hire me, and I'm being dead serious when I say that.
Hire fans with a penchant for storytelling. Yeah.
Well, or even knowledge of the characters. Or and run an idea by me, because I think respectfully, I can tell you within 5 minutes of reading a story why it won't work and what's wrong with it continuity wise, and no editor at DC caught it, and it's absolute total nonsense. And
I think there definitely needs to be a balance there. I mean, there's a reason Jeff Johns works, and not only does he know the continuity, love the continuity, and have a passion for it, the guy knows how to tell a story, and that's important. I think there's something to take note of in terms of craft. There need to be people in there that not only love these characters, but are able to really operate in the craft effectively. Ultimately, I think the issue is that there's so much potential behind the DC universe and the legacy that these mantles provide, and we're not doing anything with them because writers are incentivized to creating stories, which, we had a conversation behind closed doors about how DC is changing royalties in terms of allowing people who have had stories, aside from just creating a new character, who have had stories or plot lines adapted or reutilized, and how they're getting royalties based on that. And I love that, because then it re-incentivizes people to readjust characters we already know. It's very obvious, and it's been something people have talked about in sectors about how the only reason Bendis creates all these new characters is so that he gets royalties. And that's it. And that's the issue, is that the industry only incentivized creating new characters. Now that we can focus on adapting, people adapting quality stories and people just getting incentives for making good story, maybe we can move forward. Maybe we get a world where we can actually use Cassandra Cain like she deserves to be used. Use Jonathan Kent like he deserves to be used. There's a wealth of incredible characters in the DC universe, and nobody, which I think is a shame, personally. Like, unless you are literally like living hand to mouth working for one of those companies, I think it's a shame that you're only creating characters for royalty. Let me put that out there real quick. But aside from that, monetarily, if we're only incentivizing creating new characters, that's all people are going to do. Like, I think it's a pride thing, but I'm glad that we're incentivizing good story, because then maybe you might have somebody come in there who's going to do right by these characters that don't get the respect they deserve, because they do deserve it. That's a huge thing for me. I absolutely hate that Batman has such a big family of amazing characters that have yet to get the development they deserve. And I'm not opposed to new people taking over the role. I'm not opposed to developing Luke Fox, but damn, develop the character. Yeah. Don't just let him put on the cape and cowl, because that mantle means something not only to the fans, but to the universe that you are crafting, right? So if we're going to do this, do it right, do it organic, and make sure that it is out of love instead of spectacle, because the DC universe is legacy. They created Robin, the first legacy character, and whether or not he is as popular as he should be as a mantle has influenced not only the rest of comics to create legacy for these mantles. Spider-Man wouldn't exist without him. So, I guess that was a little bit heated. But
no, but I feel your passion, and I share it, because one of the things that I think that I would do is, and this is just me, but I really wish more writers would feel like me, and I get the sense that you're the same way, is I don't need new characters. Like, to use an example, we need Punchline and the Designer like we need a hole in the head. But don't get me wrong, they're decent characters, and Joker having another girlfriend, whatever. But my point being is this: I think that when the perfect writer, and this is what Jeff Johns brings, and this is what Donny Cates brings to the writing, and this is something that other writers don't seem to grasp, and neither does editorial, and that is, know your history, know the DC or Marvel universe, no other characters, and use past stories, build on past stories, build on past character arcs, even if you go back 5-10 years, because not only will you create an exciting new story, but you're going to create more spec in the spec market. You're going to get speculators excited, because, oh my God, we haven't seen this character in 12 years. Oh my God, he was last seen in, and you build excitement that way. And there are so many stories that I think are so easy, that just could write themselves. And I can't believe that so many writers don't seem to have the inclination to do that. And it's just so sad to see, because they're leaving money on the table. And
it's the way the industry has incentivized those types of things. I think there's a reason, unfortunately, that people are starving artists, and there are people who are telling such incredible stories that aren't getting compensated. And unfortunately, at that point, it leads the industry and these creators to make compromises, obviously, to pay their bills. And I agree with what you say for the most part, but I do have one caveat in, if you want to create a character, but you have a reason for creating the character, if there's an actual legitimate story reason to add to the universe, to add to the narrative, to add to another character even, I'm okay with that. I don't have any problem with that, because let's be frank, we wouldn't have any of our characters if we didn't create new characters. They were all new at some point. But if you're gonna do it, there needs to be a reason behind it for the story. These writers need to take a step back and remember why they're doing this, besides the paycheck. And if it's for the paycheck, sorry, this ain't the industry for you, bub.
Yeah.
Let's just put that frankly. If you're going to create a character, there needs to be a reason for it. It needs to have importance in the context of the current universe. It needs to move either a story or another character's plot progression forward, or they better be a strong enough character to make it on their own, because I don't want to hear any complaints as to why Superman X doesn't sell. I don't want to fucking hear it. Make a strong character. And the issue is, again, these publishers, I'm hoping this starts to change, with, again, how they're re-incentivizing royalties. A lot of these publishers need to incentivize telling good stories over creating new characters and overpopulating the universe. Because stories, worlds that we're building have a carrying population, just like our world does. There aren't enough resources to be able to do respect by all of them. So if you're going to create a new character, you better have a damn good reason. Otherwise, you got a whole library and a whole fucking multiverse of things to play with.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And, you know, you hit the nail on the head when you emphasized and you re-emphasized, and somebody in the chat kept telling you to keep preaching it, brother.
I appreciate
I hear you. I mean, it's all about good stories, and it is frustrating. And I guess ultimately we could dumb down our talk by saying we're just pissed off because we haven't got good stories from DC. But we've gone an extended period of time where we've got a remarkably few good stories from DC, and it's been 10 years, and it's been 35 years since Watchmen, and it's pretty sad that there's not more. Where we have no evergreen product from DC. We don't have more. That's really, really sad. And, there's really no excuse for it. And it's depressing. It really, really is. And they keep doing the same thing over and over again and throwing crap at a wall and hoping that, that looking to see what sticks. And they don't realize that the continuity is the foundation. And you need to have a strong continuity, and you don't let somebody into your house. When you let a stranger into your house who might really like your house, you don't let them sleep wherever the fuck they want. I mean, this is my house. This is what you do. If you're really good, if you're really good, or maybe I'll let you renovate this room or do this or do that, but you're still expected to respect the guests. So you're as my buddy Spike Valentine says, you're custodians of folklore. We're letting you write these unbelievable characters. You better do right by them. And it's not asking too much to know the history of these characters, because if you're going to write a story about somebody, I would hope to God you've read about them a little bit. Unlike Bendis, who comes into DC, hasn't read Superman in the past, hasn't read Justice League, hasn't read Flash, doesn't care about the fan base of Patrick Gleason and Peter Tomasi's John Kent, doesn't care about any of them, gives lip service to them, does whatever he wants, and then ends up with garbage like Young Justice, which after 14 issues still makes no sense. And now we're sitting now with Leviathan Dawn, and this is a guy who's supposed to be a Dr. Doom and Magneto, and he's more of a big, giant joke, and it doesn't fit into the DC universe. Bendis wants to write for Marvel, but somebody forgot to tell him that he came to DC, and it's a different world.
I won't even give him that level of credence, because they're not good stories. I don't care. I don't care if he's at Marvel or DC. The quality of the storytelling isn't there. I don't think he's telling Marvel style stories, because Marvel style stories can be just as great as DC style stories. And I say that as a guy with more Batman on his walls than I have anything else. Yeah. They're not good stories. He's either forgetting how to tell stories, or he's generating stories strictly for money, which we know he has at this point. So it feels like a greed play. It feels like a move of control. And we're not doing these things out of passion anymore. That's the issue, is people with passion and a love of the craft of writing, right? And telling stories need to be put in these positions to make those changes. And in Bendis' situation, to be quite frank, I don't want him anywhere right now. I want him to go, reflect on his stories, maybe age up a little bit, and then maybe come back to the indie market and tell some good stories. But as far as I'm concerned, some writers have a prime, and some of them fall from grace a little bit harder than others. And I think he has, based on maybe just that. Maybe it's based on his motives to be telling these stories. I don't know. But the moment you get guys in there like Donny Cates and Al Ewing and Snyder and Tynan and all of these guys that grew up loving these characters, loving these stories, loving this medium, who add to it, right? Like, these are guys who have proven on a number of occasions that not only do they have the passion for these characters, but they are bona fide quality storytellers. And when you invest in your universe like that, you create good stories, right? I mean, comics are such an amazing breeding ground to tell some of the best stories in the world. And when you don't utilize that, and you brought it up with the lack of evergreen stories that are being churned out by these publishers, that says something. I mean, you look at all of these awards at the Eisners. The big two have been doing this longer than anybody else. Why aren't you winning more awards? Because you're not telling the same quality of stories as some of these independent publishers. Learn from that and take the right things away from that. I feel like half the time they learn the wrong lessons. And especially DC right now, they just react to the wrong lessons. Meditate on it. Think about it. Reconsider what has made you work. Because as much as things change over time, because things do, let's not act like that, like various social climates don't change in the world, and like that won't affect who's going to be reading these stories.
Yeah.
We need to reflect on what are the things that seem to work over the fucking 85 years we've been doing this.
Yeah. And, I think the irony is that I think sometimes you gotta clean out the colon. You know what I mean? You got to clean it out. You got to take a massive dump and start over and just eat something different. Introduce something different to your body. I mean, DC needs to, they need to just, keep it simple. Don't overthink things. Stop with all the crises already. Have a good character-driven, what about a good character-driven story? I mean, even Scott Snyder, quite frankly, with his Justice League, it's got its high points, and Death Metal will have its high points, I'm sure. But let's face it, it's a plot-centric exercise. It's plot-centric, and it's focused on plot. And to the extent that it focuses on some characterizations, if it tells us something new about Wonder Woman, which it might, because he's going to give us his view on a Wonder Woman in maybe a more spiritual component of Death Metal he talked about, that's great. But we need some more character-driven stories here, and I find that DC, especially with Year of the Villain, the most disappointing thing about Year of the Villain, the most truly disappointing thing, and it's such a missed opportunity, is that with 90% of the villains that were explored, they were just plots, forcing the villains. We learned nothing new about any of the villains. That Lex Luthor gave them a gift. Gave them something that they wanted. He powered them up. And what did we learn about the villains? Well, I will say almost nothing. We learned a little bit about Sinestro, I thought. I like that. Even Lex Luthor, we learned a little bit about Lex Luthor. Learned nothing about the Cheetah. Learned nothing about Gorilla Grodd. We learned nothing about any of the Flash rogues. We learned nothing about a whole slew of other miscellaneous. We learned nothing about the Riddler. He had a self-help moment in the Batman special. We learned nothing about Penguin. What was the point? This was a plot-centric exercise where DC was hoping that the idea would inspire people to buy the comic book, not realizing that these stories were not interesting. It lacked substance. It told us nothing about why should we care. It's the Year of the Villain. Okay, so we got bad guys being bad, but they're being really bad now. That's not a story idea. That's not something that's going to intrigue me. What's the hook? What's the hook? Like if the hook is just Lex Luthor introducing, giving you something that the villains wanted, so you got a better ray gun. What's the hook? So I don't see what the hook is. Why am I gonna? That story is boring. And
the issue with Snyder, I wouldn't even call it plot centric. I think Snyder actually is ignoring logical craftsmanship of plotting to tell theme. He screams theme at you. You know what I mean? It's so evident that he literally has characters explicitly saying the theme in his dialogue. And I think the issue is actually that he's not generating a concise, tight plot. And I think Boom, just to kind of like convince you of that, if you look at his Justice League, can you tell me one part about his story that felt tight? One part of his story that felt like a tight plot. And on that, what does he do?
Yeah.
He totally alters, or not even alters. He refrains from making a tight plot because he's trying to set it in this grander atmosphere that he doesn't know how to put his hand to grasp, which affects plot.
Yeah.
And the only thing you get out of it at the end is people are inherently dark in nature. He's screaming the theme at me to sacrifice story, and I love Scott Snyder, man. Like I sat there, we sat talking on a video like months ago where all I did was praise the gospel that is his Batman run. So let me put that out there. I love Snyder, but I also will not stand him, and I will not let bad storytelling slide. And Justice League was big. It was grandiose. He had a lot of ambition behind it, but we sacrificed story for him to tell us something.
Yeah.
Literally wasting time for characters to explain it. And that, I mean, that's why to me, his Batman Who Laughs miniseries ultimately flamed out. I loved that book. Up until like issue 6. And then the entire story became him fucking screaming at me what I'm supposed to get out of this story.
Yeah.
You want to know what I like about Court of Owls, for example, and what makes it evergreen? Not only did he tell a tight story that made sense, that was literally handcrafted to be excellent in terms of how we're letting these events unfold. It had a clear theme. And in other regards, the theme could be a little bit more ambiguous. It's left in part to the reader to figure out. I think there should be some sort of consensus to a degree, on a broad way. You know, like for example, the Court of Owls was really a lot about overcoming kind of surprises in life, you know, and reshaping yourself to overcome those obstacles, the things that you don't expect out of the world.
Yeah.
But to that degree, if you want to dig any deeper, it's ambiguous. I could have the same conversation with 5 different people, and from there, they could have gotten a different thing out of it.
Well, I think you make a very good point. Snyder is excellent with themes, and there's a lot of amazing. There's great themes with his Justice League, and obviously there's a lot of themes with his Batman run, not just Court of Owls, but everything that flowed from that. Excellent Batman run, classic, like I said, evergreen, and lots of interesting
Batman run.
What's that?
It's a top 5 Batman run of all time.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And his Justice League deals with a lot of themes. What's really it's just disappointed because he really never ended the story. He never explored the themes enough. He never actually finished. It was like having a discussion with somebody and you're talking philosophy and you get cut off and you can't finish the discussion, but you feel that there's something great there, but you don't know what it is. And it's I don't know. It's unfortunate. Maybe with the mess with Justice League, maybe when there's a better work environment, now that Didio's gone, maybe people will just be allowed to finish their stories and maybe they'll tighten them up a little bit. We'll have
you got to put writers in positions that play to their strengths, aside from obviously making sure that you're hiring competent editors to be the guardians of you know the folklore and of these characters. I mean, I love Snyder, and I think without thinking, I was very, very, very excited for his Justice League run, but there was nothing in what he had done before that really predicated kind of me being excited for it. Let's be real. At what point did Snyder write anything that says that he could tonally serve the Justice League? Yeah. He didn't. You know what would have been smarter? You put Snyder in charge of Vertigo, and maybe Vertigo wouldn't have died. Maybe you give him the control that he deserves because he's a very talented writer, a very talented storyteller, and you play to his strengths. I don't think Justice League was right for him. I don't think that that's the space that he thrives in. He thrives in taking these characters who are on the street or in the dark and pushing those stories. His Swamp Thing was great. His Batman was great. You give him those opportunities to tell stories with those types of characters, and you let him play to his strengths. And as somebody who aspires to tell stories, I can respect wanting to step out of your comfort zone. I really do, because it's a great way to grow, and it's a great way to feel fulfilled in your craft. But we have to take note in the fact that maybe we could have given him that opportunity to jump out of his comfort zone, but we should have gauged it before we gave him that level of control. Because, like I said, point blank, at no point did he show that playing in that huge cosmic space of Justice League, that universe-altering space on that level and in that tone, at no point did he prove that that was part of his skill set.
Yeah, and I want to segue this discussion back to what we were initially talking about, and that is I do want to focus on, you know, the mistakes that Marvel made in 2017, and in 2 years I think they've really come out of it. Now,
yeah.
Having said that, I think Marvel's done a lot right, and I just want to review what we've established that I think Marvel's done right. They focus more on their classic characters, and they put fantastic writers on them that understand continuity and history. In particular, Donny Cates with Al Ewing and Al Ewing on Immortal Hulk, Jason Aaron on Avengers, and Valkyrie flowing out of Jane Foster Thor, and Donny Cates with all his characters. They've got their creators are less political, more active. They have a better online presence and a more healthy online presence interacting with fans. There's a better relationship with the speculator market, with the varying covers and the printings, and they're getting excited there. So their marketing is better, their advertising is better. And they have more titles, and they got more variety, and they're clearly hiring and fostering better talent, and they've got a better work atmosphere, and everybody's loving C.B. Cebulski.
Cebulski.
What's that?
C.B. Cebulski.
Cebulski. Good God, man. Cebulski. All right. So, but now, obviously, DC's not doing that. They got to do that. But I want to ask you now, what are some things that you think Marvel is still doing wrong that DC shouldn't do? Is Marvel doing anything wrong right now? Like, for example, big events or too many variant covers come to mind?
I think the biggest thing, and I don't 100% blame them for this because the numbers show on their part, even if the quality doesn't necessarily. I think that when a writer is having a very successful outing on a character or in a space of Marvel, I think they tend to really push that writer to do an event around it before they might necessarily be ready. I think that they get a little bit overexcited at saying, hey, you're doing really good here and people really like it and people seem to be buying things. If we put you on the next big Marvel event, it's going to sell and people are going to love it. And that's not always the case. And for example, you know, I love Jason Aaron. He's one of the best writers in comics, point blank. Like not just Marvel, not just DC, not just indie. Jason Aaron is incredible.
Yeah.
Original Sin, not great. Not a great story. And you know, that was kind of when he was in his most rapid growth of popularity, you know, when his story was just hitting huge. And I love the guy. And if you're going to take a risk on somebody, I'm okay with you taking that risk. But I can't help but feel that Marvel sometimes gets a little bit overexcited. And it's like, hey, I know that you have this story and it might be a smaller, more contained thing, but people really like you. So we're going to make that the event. And I think that it doesn't give them the time to really foster the story that they want to tell. You know, I know that Donny Cates, for example, like Absolute Carnage was originally just supposed to be an arc on Venom. And because of his increasing popularity, he got tapped on the shoulder and they were like, hey, that's going to be the summer event. And I know that for an event, people seem to really like Absolute Carnage, but I also see some of the complaints that people were giving about Absolute Carnage. And those complaints could be a product of the fact that Marvel pushed him into telling a story on a broader scale than he wanted to tell it. You know, I can't say that for sure, but I think that might be one of the factors.
Yeah. I've got, I've got mixed feelings. I always think Marvel always tends to overdo a good thing. And I do think I stopped collecting Absolute Carnage, honestly, not because I just got it just became, there were so many titles that were connected to it, I just gave up on it. And the Empire, I know, is going to be another thing. They had their incoming $10 one shot called Incoming that was going to explain Empire. I don't even know what it's about. I know that CB, I put up there, CB Cebulski, actually, I think this afternoon, probably as we're doing this live stream right now, Cebulski is Cebulski is at is at C2E2.
You did it.
Promoting Empire. And again, I don't think it's necessary, but they seem to have this perception that they need to have these big events. Maybe it's just part of their marketing. I think it's probably fair to say that, they look at, we don't see their internal numbers, that their internal numbers must show that some of this stuff must sell. And so they want to do that, and they want to maybe foster some collaborations between various writers. Well, and I think that's probably a healthy thing a little bit sometimes, but I don't know. There's always that you still got to have a strong core base.
Well, the thing about that is, and as much as we scream and yell at the big publishers for doing that, I mean, they kind of have a reason to. I mean, and it's in part, I'm not going to go off on a big tangent, but if somebody is really against something and they still buy it, well, then they're going to keep doing it. As much as people complain about these events, people buy it. When the new number one comes out, people buy it. Those number ones to events tend to be some of their biggest single sales throughout the year. So I think the big issue is that although people are screaming about it online, they're still buying. Yeah. So that's really, all that these publishers care about. So, in a fine and just world, there's kind of a level of ethics that would go around it, in terms of the quality of storytelling, but to the same degree, they're a business. So if money,
they are, I remember,
and people are buying these books, even though they're screaming about it online.
I know Scott Snyder, when he talked about metal, I listened to one interview he gave, and he said that he was taken to a meeting, and he was speaking to corporate executives who basically just wanted to know what toys they could make. They wanted to know the characters of metal. They wanted to know all that because it was all about making toys and how they could license and flow through other licensing products from the storyline. So that's one thing that I appreciate that they need to do as well. But all the more reason why. Like if you tell me that, look, we have big corporate gurus, we have license, we have toy manufacturers that want to know what your big event is. I think to myself, okay, how do you market 5G to that? Like, if you're DC, I just think 5G is, frankly, I mean, I can try to be excited about it and be hopeful, but it sounds like such a cop-out. It doesn't really sound like a great idea. It doesn't sound like an epic idea. And it really seems right now, and maybe I just feel down because of DC, but I just feel like in so many ways, they're sort of out of fresh ideas. And when I look at what Marvel's coming out with, at least Marvel, they got so much, they're excited. It's exciting right now at Marvel. They got different storylines. And even if I don't like Empire, I know that I got Venom, Guardians of the Galaxy, I got Valkyrie, I got Thor, I got a Silver Surfer, I got a new crazy looking Galactus.
Daredevil.
I mean, it's so there and it's exciting, but even DC doesn't know what they have. They got Darkseid. What's Darkseid doing? And now we got some eclectic 12 issues of Adam Strange, which is going to be Tom King's doing his own thing, and it'll maybe a great series, but it's not connected to the DC universe. The DC universe feels disjointed. It feels separate. It feels apart. The citizens of the DC universe are cynical. They don't even inspire their heroes anymore. Everyone's so depressed. Even the characters are depressed. And now we got a Marvelization of our top character, Superman. He doesn't need a secret identity anymore because Bendis.
Quick, if I can interject, I don't necessarily think, again, I don't think it's a Marvelization. I think it's just bad storytelling. I don't think it's necessarily a Marvel thing. I think it's just Marvel has secret identities for characters who they know and love. When Bendis doesn't know or love a character, he
Well,
does what he does. So I think that that's a product of bad storytelling, not necessarily a Marvelization.
Well, I think part of the problem with Didio is that he always deep down wanted a different tone for the DC universe. He always wanted that. His actions speak louder than words. And if you actually look at the substance of what he really wanted for DC, it looks an awful lot like Marvel in tone and sensibility. And that's why I think ultimately why he got fired. And I'm glad he got fired. And we can disagree on that. I say Marvelization. I'm not saying that's a writer's, intention. I'm just saying that tone matters, and you set the tone. I emphasize again what Jeff Johns did before Rebirth. He met with all the writers. He explained the tone that they were looking for. He explained Rebirth. He explained that it's not just a tone, it's a feeling. It's an approach to the characters. It's a mindset. This is important because it lays at the foundation of the writing. And the Marvel universe has a different mindset than the DC universe. They have different tones, and that comes with respecting the universe that you're writing for. And DC needs to right the ship on that. And I don't know. I think with I don't know. I need to have another drink.
Yeah, we'll definitely have a couple drinks after the stream ends. But one thing I think we kind of got away from, and it's also my fault because I went on my rant, is I feel like we're making this a topic of conversation about DC and not necessarily discussing the operative kind of topic. Yeah. And that is what is Marvel doing under Cebulski right now versus what they were doing in 2017, and what kind of impact, whether that be positive or negative, is that having. And if I think before I assume we're going to close out around 2 hours. I think we should probably hit back to that topic because I can't help but feel like our passions for DC Comics have overridden the topic of conversation.
Yeah, well, but yeah, that's right. They have, but I think we can tie it all in that we can recognize success from Marvel, like, because as comic book readers, I don't hate Marvel over DC. I love DC and Marvel, and I want them both to succeed. And it's just frustrating when I see something that's been working, those things that have worked for Marvel under Cebluski. When I see those have worked for Marvel, and I see DC hitting rock bottom like this, it's frustrating as hell. So let's focus on that now.
Well, so I guess with that being said, my question for you, Comic Boom, is not necessarily in tone, but in general strategy within the industry. What is Marvel doing right now, or at least since Cebulski has picked up kind of the reins on the editorial staff? What has Marvel been doing that DC could learn from? Like, let's talk about it more in terms of Marvel. And what exactly is going down that DC could take from it. I think, one topic that we could bring up is, well, look at how they're handling the X-Men. I mean, I think, there's been a lot of mixed reaction, at least, over like the quality over time of those books, but there's definitely something to be said about how Marvel kind of took a branch of comic books whose popularity started to go down too, whether it's because of straight misuse, lack of use, whatever. Yeah. And they made it one of the most exciting things of the year. I mean, House of X, Powers of X. I've gone on record. I wasn't a huge X-Men person. I mean, I'm still technically not a huge X-Men person, and I won't pretend to be. But, there's something to be said about how excited House of X and Powers of X made me for X-Men. So I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, you ask an excellent question, and one of the masterful things that Hickman did with the X-Men is that he's first of all, he challenged existing X-Men readers, and each issue of House of X and Powers of X, and I'm not an X-Men expert by any stretch. It took me a long time to reach each of those issues, but I wanted to. It was rich in history. It had explanatory notes. It had its own language. It built on existing continuity. It pulled it all in, and it really had a different approach, and particularly with Moira McTaggart and the 9 lives or 10 lives of Moira McTaggart there. And
dope retcon.
What's that?
That was a dope retcon.
Yeah,
that really liked that.
Excellent, fantastic, and I've said this. I even use that as an example that, you know, Hickman felt passionate about the X-Men, and this is his X-Men magnum opus, and he's doing a fantastic job, and he's building on it. And you can criticize it. I mean, it's not without its criticism. I get that, but DC needs something like that. I even said, for example, a prime example, and Bendis doesn't have the skill to pull this off. Bendis really doesn't, but not. And again, I'm not even trying to pick on Bendis, but good Lord, the guy's an easy target. But I use his Legion of Superheroes as an example. Number one, you don't need John Kent. You didn't need to age up John Kent to make him Legion of Superheroes. You could have had Connor Kent end up in the 31st century, but that's besides the point. There should have been a source book created for the Legion of Superheroes. We still don't know anything about the future. We could have had an epic storyline along the lines that could have been maybe sophisticated and was challenging to the reader, as opposed to challenging to the reader for all the wrong reasons, because we don't understand the dialogue, or because it's nonsense, or that we're 4 issues into Legion and not a heck of a lot has happened as it could have. Or with Superman, we get the Rogolzar storyline, and we still really don't know. We still don't know much about the Circle. We still don't know why was Jor-El banished back to the past. Why was Jor-El arguably executed sent to the past for time traveling, and nobody seems to care that the Legion of Superheroes are time traveling all the time. These are all the questions. And what's the plot? What's the larger narrative that we're focusing on? It's so unfocused. And to answer to more to my point, what's great about the X-Men is that we know what the new status quo is, and it's an interesting status quo. And the DC universe doesn't have a really interesting status quo. And that's what's so disappointing about it. They really need to have a summit, and they need to have better ideas, and they're not getting those ideas, and they're not building on the existing ones. And they're just like Marvel is making DC look stupid in the ideas department, quite frankly.
No, I mean, you're not wrong. And I know a lot of people, and we're seeing some of it in the chat, that are having backlash against the X-Men because they see them as radicals. And something I'd like to present to you is, I mean, look at the perspective. What happens when a marginalized and abused group in our society has power and has sovereignty over themselves? What is that perspective like? They're not going to be exactly the same as they were when they were under that old context, right? I mean, if I take you and I put you in the middle of, you know, some random country out east, you're not going to be the same person, because you're under a totally different context. You're not going to act the same way. You're not going to go to GameStop every other Tuesday to trade in your used game, whatever you do. So I'll pose that. I think it's an interesting thought exercise. What happens when a marginalized and abused and really totally downtrodden group of society takes over and has their power and has their sovereignty? What do they do with that? Especially under the context of having fucking superpowers. I mean, like, it's an interesting thought experiment. So I think most of the time when people are reacting to how radical the X-Men are being on Krakoa, take into consideration, nobody is going to act the same under every single different circumstance in their lives. And the thing that I like about the X-Men, and I like Hickman's willingness to push that and to take the mutants out of tradition, is that it presents a lot of interesting opportunity to see what these characters are like individually and as a whole under these different circumstances. I mean, the fact that, you know, we see how Charles Xavier has kind of been manipulated by Moira a little bit. What happens? What happens when Charles Xavier is kind of being conditioned to process the world in a different way? Well, that's what we get. We get a little bit more ruthless leader. What happens under those situations? So I think it's really interesting. And that's what makes it interesting to me, because it feels more fleshed out. It feels like we're attacking this from different angles, because now the X-Men, the mutants, aren't just this minority in the United States. They are a entire population of a country. What does that mean?
And I like the
how do they develop as a society? Because just in how our societies, we've garnered a lot of positive things that build community. We also have a lot of terrible people out there. How do people change under those contexts? So I think X-Men is really interesting. And even though every book is not for me, I think some of them have gotten a little bit boring. I think that the impetus behind it is really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. The impetus is fantastic behind the X-Men, and that's the one thing with all the Dawn of X titles. I know a lot of Marvel fans are upset with all the Dawn of X titles. There's too many, but as someone who I don't read all of them anyway, so I like to be able to pick and choose. I really like, for example, the latest issue of X-Men 7, and you and I, we read the comics, we read them digitally. I really like the idea of Nightcrawler now struggling with whether or not to create a new religion for the X-Men, given the themes that are introduced and the moral dilemmas that they have, that since now all the mutants can resurrect themselves at any time. They can always die, and they're guaranteed resurrection pretty much because of those five X-Men that can do it. It's very interesting. Very rich, totally building on.
It provides totally different avenues. And, someone in the chat says, but they won't be superheroes. Superheroes shouldn't be making the same choices I would. One, you're idealizing a civil rights group. The X-Men are a civil rights group with powers. That's what they are. They're not traditional superheroes. If you want to criticize somebody for making the same choices as you, look at, or if you want to put a character on that pedestal, you look at Captain America, you look at Superman, but that's not what the X-Men are. As somebody who I am not somebody who's been reading X-Men for 20 years, but what I will say is they're a people. They're not necessarily a superhero group. And have they gone down more heroic avenues? Yeah. Yes, but it's more on the premise of civil rights than anything else.
And Ash on Comics, he says that making the X-Men into a fascist ethno supremacy state isn't what he enjoys. And I can sympathize with that, because we can all get you have your own particular interpretation of the X-Men. This is definitely a radical, a risky take on the X-Men that Hickman has explored. The last time I saw something this risk-taking, this was even more, was Grant Morrison, and Hickman, I think, is taking more risks with the X-Men than any other writer has done so, and Marvel has given him the ability to do so, and they've let him do that because he's got great ideas. The concern, of course, is, that's what I'd like. I'd like DC to take the risks right now, but unfortunately for DC, the risk that they took was with, like you said, and it all comes down to just bad writing. It's the writing, and Bendis's writing is just terrible. Like, it's just not interesting. It's really, really not interesting. I don't care what he's doing. It's boring as hell, and Jimmy Olsen, boring. I don't mind Lois Lane, but again, nothing's really exciting. And even the big events, they're just not there. And there's no hook. And Hickman has got some really interesting hooks with the X-Men. And what the DC universe needs is they need a huge risk-taking approach to look at the DC universe as a whole. And I'm not sure what it would take, but I got to tell you, I'm trying to think. I actually have some ideas. I don't want to, I won't, we're coming on 2 hours here, but I'm just really disappointed with the lack of fresh and really interesting ideas from the writers. Because you and I had a chat earlier about, we assigned DC writers to Marvel. And we stated our surprise that we believe that DC does have some quality talent there, no question. And but nonetheless, I think they need to be inspired or something, or maybe they need to be smoking a different joint. I don't know.
It's a peculiar situation. And, I know a lot of people are like Paulo says, from a storytelling point of view, though, people want to care about the protagonist. A protagonist doesn't need to particularly be likable to care about. I mean, you could care about a protagonist because they're interesting. I mean, there are thousands of stories out there where characters are a particular way, and they don't have to be likable to be followable. I mean, honestly, I think it's more interesting if a character goes from being likable to likable. It's why I like Damian Wayne so much. I mean, he's a little asshole, but you know what's really really satisfying? Watching him grow, watching him change, watching him develop as not only a person, but as somebody in the context of a superhero world, being the son of Batman. What does that mean? So I don't think a character has to particularly be, morally good or likable in that fashion to be interesting. I'd read a story about someone who I hate, as long as they make it interesting. That's what's important. The story needs to be followable. And I question a couple of different things, where people are telling me, hey, I don't understand the X-Men. I'm curious how you can stand on that platform and tell me why you in particular know who the X-Men are and why I don't. You can disagree with my sensibilities, and that's totally fine. But there's no qualifier. You have no certificate besides maybe one you might print and put on your refrigerator that says that you know who the X-Men are and what they are, because other people have different interpretations. So
yeah, I just want to make a comment, and just to build on that, I know there's some comments on there that suggest that maybe Dark Knight and myself, maybe we don't understand the X-Men, and I will just say this, that you could be absolutely right that I don't because I've not read a lot of X-Men, and so maybe my sensibilities are off, and there's a lot of stories that I don't understand them, and that's absolutely, those are comments that, I mean, I can't I have no response to that other than to say this, that the point that Dark Knight and I are trying to make, bottom line is, because we're mostly DC guys, but we respect Marvel, is Hickman has gotten our attention with the X-Men, and he's done a good job, and he's inspired us to check out the stories. And even if we, and it's going in different directions, and I don't mind being challenged with, if Hickman came and did something that challenged my sensibilities on writing the Justice League, if he introduced a status quo for Justice League that led to 6 or 7 different titles that spawned out of Justice League, as opposed to we have like what we have now, we just have Justice League Odyssey, we have Justice League Dark, and they're all different in their own way, but they well, again, I just find that in terms of a status quo, they're not quite as exciting as what Hickman is. Hickman has inspired different storytelling for the X-Men. He's gotten noticed, and he's done something that he's really rocked the boat here. And make no mistake, I think he's created future evergreen trade paperbacks. I think Hickman's X-Men run is going to be as beloved or as controversial, I'll say controversial, not beloved, controversial or potentially divisive as Grant Morrison's X-Men was. Everybody seems to love Josh Whedon's run on the X-Men, but I don't mind, you got to rock the boat a little bit. And what I find that DC's doing is they're boring us to death. In my view, Marvel is not boring us to death, because, Marvel is rocking the boat, pushing the envelope, creating passion amongst the people in the chat, all the guys in the chat, from WoW's, Action Comics, Paul Acosta, Maverick, all you guys, Solo Rebirth, you're all got excellent opinions, and people are talking about the X-Men. How many people are really talking about Justice League, other than me bitching about the vote that we lost because Doom won? I just feel sometimes like I'm alone in the wilderness on this stuff.
I mean, I thought Snyder's Justice League was a wash too. So I think really it's just taking into perspective interpretation, because a lot of characters mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And the X-Men can mean a lot of different things for different people, depending on when you picked them up, what your first interpretation of them was. And point blank, like you said, Comic Boom, people are talking about the X-Men again. And ultimately, as Marvel is a business, they're selling, they sold books. And even if you want to call it temporary, they made strides in the direction and people were talking about it. I mean, Hoxpox, you couldn't go anywhere in any comic book platform on the internet and not hear about it. So they did something right. And Boom brings up a good point. Nobody's talking about Justice League. people, yeah, sure, people are buying Metal because it's a big spectacle, but the sales didn't translate to Justice League. Justice League, I think, sold like an average of like 60 something thousand copies. It's not big. And it's one of DC's marquee books. When Metal, of course, is probably, at least for the first couple issues, going to sell over 100,000 copies. There's something that's wrong in translation, right? Because people weren't talking about Justice League. People talked about Metal. Then Justice League happened, and I'm sure people are going to talk about Death Metal, and I'm sure it's going to sell well. But there's something that is lost in translation between going from Metal, which I don't think was well executed, but to Justice League, which is selling very median numbers.
Yeah. No, and I guess at the end of the day, what we have, we have our consensus on DC being in a state of flux right now. There's a lot of stuff to be concerned about, and I'm not sure if I really changed my mind on all this. I still remain jealous of Marvel. As a DC fan, I'm so jealous of Marvel because they have all these cool. I would rather DC publish more than less. I have more writers, have more selection. And I think that with DC publishing less and focusing on the young adult titles, I realize they're focused on their bottom line and there's a corporate decision for that. But as a purebred comic book lover, I wish there was more comic books of more of these characters. And but that doesn't seem to be the case. And because if you're going to have fewer titles, you better nail those titles good. You better do a damn good job. And I guess, I know Ash on Comics, he made the comment that he actually prefers DC's titles right now over Marvel. And that's fair. I mean, I guess, to each his own. And it is what it is. Maybe I want a little bit of more realism. I want a little bit more chutzpah. I want a little bit more chutzpah, as they say in the DC titles. And maybe with Dan Didio gone, maybe we'll get that. I just have a really hard time. I mean, Jim Lee, I don't think that guy could boil water, with a stove. I mean, he doesn't inspire a lot of stuff. He's not particularly, I don't know. I just feel depressed right now. Say something to cheer me up.
Well, I mean, I don't know. You might have a friend working in comics soon. that might be. But I mean, the thing is that the DC has a lot of potential, and that was really brought out in our last conversation where we did the draft. I think DC definitely has the talent, but there's something going wrong on the editorial level, and that's something that not a lot of people in comics, especially the fan base, they don't talk about. I think it's very easy to blame the kind of public front, right? Like it's easy just to look at the writer or the artist and immediately be like, well, that's 100% your fault, where we don't know what's happening behind the scenes editorially. And at this point, I think it might be fair to say, based on the consensus we're setting with the DC mainline as a whole, is a lack of editorial strength. Yeah. And, we've seen AT&T constantly, since they've bought Warner and DC, trying to put their people in charge of comics instead of people that know comics. And I'm hoping they learn the lesson soon that doesn't make good stories, that won't generate sales. But I think that, I mean, I can't necessarily give you hope for the future of the DC universe, but all I can say is that at least there's, with this massive shift going on, there's a potential for it to go either way, right? Like at least we know, based right now, that there are decisions being made to change DC in a time where we're not particularly fond of what they're doing. So there's just as much of a potential of good things happening as there are bad. So at least it takes it from negative to like neutral zone of possibility here. I think generally Marvel has been doing a pretty good job with most of their books. Whether or not it's involved in these big crossover events, a lot of them have very faithful audiences. Like Chip Zdarsky, for example, has kind of generated his own camp over there at Marvel. and a good base of fans who will transfer over and read things that he writes. You know, his Daredevil has been solid. His Spider-Man life story, a lot of people seem to really like. And
sorry, you're frozen on my end here.
Oh, weird. Well, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. Sorry about that. You just froze up.
It's not your fault. You know, and all we can do, I guess what I was saying was, you know, that at least with Marvel, you can look at these kind of individual camps of books, and for the most part, you know, they seem to have a very diehard fan base. And, you know, I'm not super sure if it reflects entirely in the sales, but obviously, you know, Immortal Hulk has been a very, very outspoken, has an audience that's been very outspoken, and it's why it's gotten kind of these credits at the Eisners and other such awards. It's why people seem to really like Daredevil. You know, a lot of the buzz that I'm hearing right now is that Daredevil is going to be up there with the likes of Bendis and Miller. So that's huge. You know, you look at Thor, obviously Donny Cates is pretty early on into the run, but it seems to be overwhelmingly positive reaction. You see what he did with Venom, and I admittedly went into Venom being one of the most skeptical people on the earth. I was like, Venom is just a spectacle. People because he's crazy 90s like action and like, and I shut the fuck up when I read Venom, because from what I read, I can't claim to be up to date, but from what I read, it's very clear that Donny Cates is really trying to make story progress with Venom. He's trying to make progress on the character of Eddie Brock. So I think that if we can say one thing that Marvel has done, has kind of built up this very loyal fan base around each of their like capstone characters. You know, like Thor has a really faithful audience right now. Spider-Man has always had a faithful audience. I think the reaction to Nick Spencer's run has been very mixed, but he has his audience. Immortal Hulk has a very diehard audience. Daredevil has a very diehard audience right now. Even for those that are saying that Ta-Nehisi Coates might have gone on too long, Ta-Nehisi Coates has a really vocal audience on Black Panther. So,
yeah,
you know what I mean? If anything from them, it's that you're putting, not only are the editors starting to pay attention to continuity, they're putting people on these books that not only are talented at what they do, they know these characters and they love them and they have a take on them.
Yes. And with that, it all comes down to the editors, and that's what's happened in the last little bit. That's why we're talking here. Dan Didio, of course, is a co-publisher. He had a lot of editors under him who have quit. He fostered a bad work environment. So the editorial environment at DC is not very good. And I think it's shown in the product. I think that's our consensus here. It's not necessarily shared by all those in the chat, but we can all agree to respectfully disagree. We all want the best for DC and Marvel, because the better the comics, the more bang we get for our buck. And at $3.99 a comic book, that can get awfully expensive. So with that, I'm going to end this chat. We're at 2 hours. We're at 7 minutes past 2 hours. Dark Knight. I want to thank you, Dark Knight, and I want to thank everybody in the chat. Ash on Comics, Tevye Smolka, Solo Rebirth, Paulo Costa, and Maverick, and there's a whole slew of you. And I apologize that I'm sure I'm going to miss some of you. There's a whole bunch. There was up to 17 at one point, and but in any event, thanks everybody. And Dark Knight, once again, guys, check out Dark Knight's channel. He just did a great review of Detective Comics, the latest issue of Detective Comics. What issue was that, Dark Knight?
1020.
1020. It's an excellent. Dark Knight does a fantastic. He's the best at analyzing story structure and why things work and why they don't. And check out his channel. It is on the link below. And yeah, and thanks for watching, guys. And Dark Knight, any last words?
I mean, thank you guys for watching. You know, I think that there's definitely a significance in agreeing to disagree. You know, I definitely disagreed with a couple of you guys, and you know, I think that the important thing to realize is we can have different perspectives and different interpretations on, these characters and what they mean. And, you know, one of the reasons why I love chatting with Boom so much is that, you know, we really only agree half the time, and the other half of the time we present our cases. And I think that being that we are all different people, we're going to feel different ways about things. So, you know, I'm glad that there were a couple of you in the chat that could sit here and have this conversation, and hopefully we can agree to disagree on some things. But, you know, I appreciate everybody coming to watch. I appreciate, you know, being able to sit down and have this conversation with my pal Comic Boom. If for some reason you're watching this and you're not subscribed to him, what are you doing? This guy's one of the best on the internet. So,
okay, well, guys, thanks, and we'll catch you on the flip side. And Comic Boom out, and catch you later, Dark Knight.
Catch you later, guys.